bipartisan support remains a strong piece of innovative energy and climate policies. And there are going to be a ton of opportunities to advance regional economic development through the carbon hubs that were authorized on a bipartisan basis in the Energy Act and the infrastructure. And I think the GOP has historically had that track record of supporting carbon management policies specifically. So we're at an inflection point with historic investments in tech and the new administration willing to unleash American energy through permitting reform.
Carbonsations, today's carbon industry leaders.
Welcome to the Carbonsations podcast, where we speak to some of the leading figures in the emerging carbon industry. For this episode, we're joined by Savita Bowman, Senior Program Manager in Carbon Management at ClearPath, a nonprofit that collaborates with public and private sector stakeholders to advance American innovation while working to reduce global carbon emissions. Savi, I'm thrilled to have you as a guest on this podcast, and I'm really looking forward to speaking to you about ClearPath and what you guys have been busy with lately. But before we do, I'd love it if we could get a little bit of your backstory first.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you so much, Violet, for having me here today. I really appreciate it. Well, as you mentioned, my name is Savita Bowman, but you can call me Savvy, and I'm ClearPath Senior Program Manager for Carbon Management. As you mentioned before, ClearPath is a conservative clean energy advocacy organization, and my story is that I grew up in Malaysia, a beautiful country in Southeast Asia, and have always been passionate about finding practical solutions to complex climate challenges. And that led me to pursue a bachelor's at the State University of New York, College of Environmental Science and Forestry, and then to go on to work at Tesla on solar and battery technologies. I then later got my master's in sustainability management at Columbia University and was looking for my next big thing and discovered ClearPath. I thought ClearPath was particularly interesting because it was the first time I come across an organization working with Republicans on clean energy. And it really just aligned with my own personal values on looking at pragmatic solutions.
All right. And so how's the experience of working with ClearPath been so far?
So far, it's been amazing. Joining ClearPath has allowed me to channel a lot of the passion I had growing up into tangible actions. We focus on a lot of different technologies here at ClearPath, but on my team, we work specifically on carbon management technologies, and that means we get to look at creative policy ideas for research and development, regulatory and or financing strategies as well. And I think one of the most, gratifying pieces of this opportunity at ClearPath is being able to work on durable solutions and bipartisan policies to kind of build a path forward for clean tech that just makes sense.
All right. And so with that said, those of us who are working in this industry have a very clear understanding on the importance of carbon management and mitigating climate change. But how can carbon management be made more relatable and actionable for the general public?
Yeah. Well, I think maybe let's take a step back and, talk about carbon management as a set of technologies and what they really are. I think the best analogy I really love to use is the bathtub analogy, and you'll hear me use this quite a bit, but think of the Earth as a bathtub, and it's currently overflowing with water. So we need to do two main things, turn off the tap and drain the tub. Think of turning off the tap as reducing the amount of emissions we release into the air. So, low carbon clean technologies like carbon capture, nuclear, low carbon manufacturing processes for steel and concrete. And think of draining the tub like the CDR technologies your viewers know and love as well, like the direct air capture technologies, marine carbon removal practices, and natural solutions like planting trees. So I hope that tries to kind of paint a picture but I'd say that is sort of like the visualization of what it is. And in terms of where the industry is today, I mean, your listeners know this already, but CO2 occurs naturally in small amounts in the earth. And we also have emissions that are a result of industrial processes as well. And so if we look at what's in the atmosphere, the total concentration of CO2 in the air, that's about 420 parts per million in the air. And that's roughly 50% higher than it was before the Industrial Revolution. So in terms of where the opportunity is for, carbon removal and carbon capture technologies, we're looking at building out solutions that will reach a billion-ton scale to capture emissions that are from power production or from industrial manufacturing and prevent them from getting into the air, or getting billions of tons out of the air and storing them safely either underground or using them to make valuable products. If we go by reports, the National Academies of Science estimates that we'll need to remove roughly 10 billion tons of CO2 annually by 2050 from the air, and that's about 2 billion for the United States. And then for carbon capture technologies, that's about 1 billion metric tons of CO2 yearly by 2050.
All right, that's certainly a significant amount. So how do we get started on that? How do we convince policymakers and the public to get on board with this and start taking meaningful action?
That's a great question, and I think particularly interesting because carbon management has historically been a bipartisan space. It has received a lot of bipartisan support through many different policy opportunities in the past and also in the future. And I'm going to do a little bit of a history lesson, but bear with me for a second. So many of your viewers might already be familiar with these incentives or policy mechanisms, but maybe not the history behind it. And so one of the incentives that's really well known is 45Q. It's a tax incentive that started back in 2008 when Congress established the tax credit under the Energy Improvement and Extension Act to incentivize carbon capture. Then in the 2010s, a couple challenges started popping up, and the credit wasn't driving the desired investment that really would be catalytic to the industry. And that's where bipartisan reforms really came in to elevate the credit and make it impactful. In 2018, it was updated, and there were a couple things that were addressed with the carbon capture pieces, including lowering the capture eligibility thresholds and then expanding the credit to direct air capture technologies. Then in 2020, the Bipartisan Energy Act of 2020 extended 45Q for an additional 2 years. And then in 2022, there were additional enhancements that made the credit quite beneficial to industry to be able to move the needle on deployments. So what's with the history lesson? Well, it's important to remember that 2 of the major updates and improvements to 45Q happened during a Trump administration. And then we also had additional legislation during the Trump administration, the Bipartisan Energy Act of 2020, which I mentioned earlier, which modernized energy policy for the first time in over 10 years by authorizing carbon management RD&D programs, and then followed by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which authorized and appropriated $12 billion for carbon management research, development, and demonstration programs. And that's where, the famous $3.5 billion direct air capture hubs came from, and the famous $2.5 billion carbon capture demonstration program came from. So lots of really exciting things created there. And then we also had the CHIPS and Science Bill, which provided additional provisions on a bipartisan basis. And it's interesting because we're having this conversation at a unique time because it's the beginning of a Congress. So Congress hasn't yet introduced many bills. And right now we're also at the start of a presidency. So all eyes were on last week's inauguration, and conversations have been centered around finalizing the fiscal year 25 budget. However, we're optimistic at ClearPath that we're going to see a lot of exciting legislation start getting reintroduced from last Congress, or new proposals altogether. Some bipartisan proposals from last Congress that we're particularly excited and interested in seeing again include the Carbon Removal and Emissions Storage Technologies Act, or the CREST Act, which supports a technology-inclusive, competitive program that would allow us to take a buckshot approach at deploying CDR solutions and prevent locking in inefficient technologies, really. And then the other bill that we're really excited about is the Next Generation Pipelines Research and Development Act. It was introduced in the House last Congress by Representatives Randy Weber and Yeter Carvalho, which would authorize new programs at DOE in coordination with the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration and the National Institute of Standards to focus on research and development for next generation pipeline systems. And then, of course, some might be familiar with this one because it's on 45Q, but the Carbon Utilization Parity Act, which is a bill Senator Cassidy and Senator Whitehouse introduced last year in the Senate, and then Representative Schweikert and Sewell in the House. So lots of exciting things that we would like to see kind of reemerge this Congress, and lots of opportunities, I think, to get steel in the ground as well this in the next 2 to 4 years.
Absolutely. And kind of despite what you said about some of the most important climate legislation being introduced under a Republican administration, a lot of folks are kind of worried right now about the future of carbon management now that Donald Trump is president again. What would you have to say to them? And what are your kind of personal views and personal forecasts maybe of what carbon management is going to look like this year and maybe the years leading up to 2030?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of us are also interested to see what the next 4 years hold. But I think where we need to kind of ground ourselves is to what I mentioned earlier. Bipartisan support remains a strong piece of innovative energy and climate policies. And there are going to be a ton of opportunities to advance, regional economic development through the carbon hubs that were authorized on a bipartisan basis in the Energy Act and the infrastructure. And I think the GOP has historically had that track record of supporting carbon management policies specifically. So we're at an inflection point with historic investments in tech and the new administration willing to unleash American energy through permitting reform. The next 4 years really present the opportunity to start putting, like I mentioned before, steel in the ground and get closer to that billion-ton scale that's needed. There's a lot of positive momentum on bipartisan action, and we're optimistic about the future opportunities, particularly on the policy opportunities like the Farm Bill that's going to be coming up as well. Finalization of the 45Q rules from IRS. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is expiring soon, so there will be another tax opportunity that will come up. And then looking forward for, fiscal year 26, there will be budget opportunities to request. Actually, we're coming up on that season right now from February through about the start of April will be the budget request season for fiscal year 26. So DOE is going to continue carrying out the critical carbon management research, development, and demonstration activities that have been authorized, that have been appropriated, including direct air capture and the CCUS demos. And so, I think some also positive momentum and exciting momentum we've seen is that the PHMSA, or the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, released a CO2 pipelines rule, a draft rule, which provided draft long-awaited safety regulations for carbon dioxide pipelines. So we're seeing the progress and the unwavering sort of action by the federal agencies to work on this. And so I think, as I mentioned before, this next 2 to 4 years is going to be really the opportunity to get steel in the ground.
Okay. So perhaps taking it a step back, proposed future legislation aside, what do you believe currently the most important piece of active legislation is for carbon capture and carbon removal at the moment?
Well, as I mentioned, it is an interesting time because it's the start of a Congress. So not a ton of new bills are out there just yet at the moment. But there have been 45Q proposed changes through a bill that will likely be reintroduced, to work on bringing more parity through the utilization aspect and kind of elevating the credit level to be more impactful for carbon capture and carbon removal projects, specifically for direct air capture. And then I think forward-looking, you'll have a lot of opportunities to see new bills, new ideas come to the table, or some of the old bills that I mentioned before that were introduced last Congress to be reintroduced again.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I hope that answers the question a little. It's kind of challenging because we're in a point, it's January, there's not really like a ton that's happened just yet. Maybe check back in 3 months and then I'll be able to tell you. But we're also, dealing with a unique situation, with the presidency and, everyone trying to make sure that they hit the ground running, but also set everyone up for success as well with the federal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But that is why it's also exciting to be having this conversation now, precisely. So what opportunities do you see for partnerships between the federal government and the private sector as far as scaling carbon capture and removal technologies goes?
Yeah, that's, I think, one of the most exciting pieces of this whole piece. I mean, being able to work with the federal agencies to bring these projects to life is one of the biggest pieces, right? Like there are so many partnership programs that have emerged since the Energy Act of 2020 was the Energy Act was refreshed, and then the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So a couple programs I think I might just like shoot off that are pretty exciting to keep an eye out on are the Carbon Safe program. The Carbon Safe program has been around for a very long time. It is a program that looks to research and develop carbon storage pathways. It's traditionally focused on saline geologic storage, but I know that there are newer cutting edge types of storage pathways like carbon mineralization that Carbon Safe is also looking into. Another program that I think is really interesting is the CDR Purchase Pilot Prize, which is a competitive prize program where it supports a diverse set of CDR technologies and allows them to compete based on, cost, based on efficiency, based on how capable the solution is to scale, and come down to that $100 or less per ton threshold. And that's, spurred a lot of partnership with private sector where they've been able to, apply and kind of work with the federal agencies to build their projects and also have like a first customer for a lot of their projects. Because as you know, with CDR and any really company, any startup, any technology, it's really hard when you're a first mover in the market. So getting that first customer always helps create a little bit of, financial security as well. And then I think some of the other programs that'll be really interesting to see are sort of the less more on the public-private partnership, but maybe something I think we would love to see improved is the Class 6 carbon storage program at EPA. It is currently, run through the federal EPA, and there are 4 states with primacy meaning the ability for the state to permit its own wells rather than having to wait for the federal government to make a decision on it. And there's a lot of other states that are queuing up to get that primacy. And, the more that these private sector companies can really work with their state legislators to provide the support that the state legislators also need and the technical understanding that they need to be able to understand, how many projects are really in their backyard? How many are they really going to be able to support if they do get that primacy? I think is also critical. And then, of course, I think one of the biggest catalytic programs at DOE have been the, hub programs where we've been able to see the deployment of many direct air capture technologies, as well as carbon capture technologies. And, they've also started building interactive maps like the carbon matchmaking tool, which has, paired startups and innovators and project developers with the project sites and, kind of gotten them talking to each other, which will help build a little bit more connective tissue as the industry tries to scale.
Fantastic. Savvy, you mentioned financial security kind of being a major challenge, a major issue in this industry. What other major challenges would you say that the sector has at this time?
Yeah, that is a big question. And I think I'll take a small step at it first, or maybe a step back to maybe talk about the financial opportunity and then talk about the challenges here.
Sure thing.
If we look at, companies and why we're really doing carbon management technologies, right? One of the biggest reasons we're looking at this is because big companies are trying to meet their net zero goals and meet them quickly. Some of them have 2030 goals, some of them have 2050 goals. The global carbon footprint management market generated a revenue of about $11 billion in 2023 and is expected to reach $20 billion by 2030. So people are investing in calculating their carbon footprint and figuring out how to manage them. CDR solutions alone, they represent $370 million in the global market in 2022 and is projected to reach about $8.1 billion in 2028. So there's a huge opportunity financially here. Now, getting into the actual like nuts and bolts, what are the challenges? How do we get to them? How do we really get to the market that we are all really dreaming of? Right now, there's high costs. Like there's three main things: high costs for deployment. 2 is the regulatory and permitting hurdles. And 3 is building the actual infrastructure. So think of like pipelines, storage facilities, that kind of thing. Going to the first piece, high cost. As inflation has been a huge challenge with many projects in America, it has kind of increased the costs of these projects significantly. And with a lot of that created some delays in securing project financing, reaching FID, and being able to, confidently say that these projects will be able to meet the financial targets that they're setting for themselves. And then to the second point with regulatory and permitting hurdles, put simply, you can earn a 4-year college degree faster than permitting a carbon storage project in America. It's crazy to think, because you could go, the shortest timeline, if we do the state route where we have states permitting their own wells, can be 6 months. And then you can, in the worst case scenario, go up to 6 years for that permitting to really be approved. And so the intended impact of federal funding opportunities for CCS and CDR technologies in recent years has been stymied by these permitting bottlenecks. As I mentioned before, inflation and increased project costs are also kind of creating that additional financial strain. And then building the infrastructure. If we talk about all the different tools we have for construction and things, pipeline projects particularly, I'll use it as an example, are being delayed or even canceled due to the unpredictable regulatory environment and the challenges with getting the steel in the ground to be able to build these pipelines. And for storage, there's growing backlogs for classic permit applications. I think the last time I looked, it was like over 140 permits under the EPA. So it's kind of like a push and pull between permitting and actually even getting steel in the ground, where you need one to do the other, and getting one has been quite challenging.
Okay. And you mentioned how policy can be kind of a hurdle on the way to, scaling this industry, but how can policy help accelerate these technologies and bring them from, the research and development stage to more widespread deployment?
It's funny because when I first started out in this industry, I didn't even know what policy mechanisms and support mechanisms really existed. And I got a crash course, and it was really amazing to see how policy can really be helpful at all stages of a technological development sort of life cycle. If we're talking solutions from a policy standpoint, the first one we're really going to need is streamlining the permitting process for carbon capture projects to reduce delays at the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, and encourage private sector participation to help bring more of a two-way conversation to get these projects going. State primacy, like I mentioned, for Class 6 carbon storage can reduce the burden on the federal EPA for classic permitting wait times, and clarity on new permitting pathways, such as carbon mineralization. Like Iceland is storing CO2 right now underground using carbon mineralization, carbon mineralization technologies. And in the US, we are doing it through saline injection, which is, we've done that for many, many, many years, over 50 years. And so that's fine, but it's not the new cutting edge solution. And I think that's where the opportunity is, looking at those new cutting edge solutions. The other piece here is also looking at marine carbon removal solutions. There are a ton that are emerging, electrochemical separation, ocean alkalinity enhancement, blue carbon, looking at how we can, take coastal blue carbon and turn it into valuable products. So making sure that there are clear permit paths for all of these technologies will be really important. And I'm not saying it's, a permitting pathway to deploy the technology tomorrow. These are still new technologies. They need to be tested. They need to be demonstrated and make sure that they meet all the same requirements that a lot of our technologies have to meet today. But it's getting the permitting pathway to test the technology, to be able to, make sure it works, make sure it does what it's saying it's supposed to do. So I think with the permitting pieces, those are some of the solutions off the bat. And then if we look at, broader, longer term policy support for like financial confidence. 45Q in particular has been one of the most useful tools, and some people would say the most important tool in spurring development of carbon capture projects and driving down costs. So making sure that we're protecting 45Q to provide project finance certainty, and then also being able to adjust it for inflation in the future as another opportunity, forward looking on policy, and then also making sure that we are being able to extend it if and when possible to have this incentive available for projects in the future.
Thank you. Thank you for providing that clarity into these rather complex, I would say, matters. But I have a question that might feel a little bit more lighter for our listeners, and it is for their listeners, actually. What can they, whether it's policymakers, industry leaders, or individuals, do to contribute to advancing carbon management?
I think I'm going to answer this in 3 ways. So the first thing is read up. Read up about all of the stuff. Educate yourself the best way you can. I think one of the things at ClearPath we do well and we love to do is be able to educate policymakers and the public about what these technologies are, and being able to show, what the not only economic potential is, whatever the, climate benefits are, but also how it can really be exciting for individuals to be part of this field. There's a lot of transferable knowledge from traditional industry folks to the new cutting edge technologies. And for folks who are looking for their next big, exciting, career opportunity, this is an exciting career opportunity space. And so I think being able to think of how you can plug in to this space is going to be critical. The second, I think, is to also make sure that, industry is really great at working on their solutions, but I think we need to become a little bit more accessible to the public. I think, conversations like this are perfect to being able to get more folks into the tent and get more of them excited about what the opportunity is here, and why it's so important. And then I think also, on the individual level, kind of going back to your question, getting more folks working on this, yes, sure, in their daily lives is great, but also engaging in conversations with their own circles, engaging in conversations with their state and representatives and federal level representatives even. Whether you're a policymaker, industry leader, or an individual, I think everyone has a role to play. And that goes from supporting smart policies to working to, educate yourself on what these innovative solutions are and how they're really going to reduce those emissions and create that impact that we're all really looking for.
Savvy, I have one final question for you, and that is, what does ClearPath have lined up for the next weeks and months? Are there any upcoming developments that you can hint at?
Well, we're working on a lot of really exciting things, and I think I've already touched on some of them, but I think it's worth highlighting them again. But we're excited to work on modernizing permitting here at ClearPath, building new pathways to get projects and steel in the ground quickly, really drive the deployment for new reliable energy and innovation. The United States has been a hub for innovation forever, and we would love to see that continue into the future. And so we're going to work our hardest to the policy solutions that we have to make sure that is true. On other energy sides as well, like we work on nuclear and geothermal and storage technologies as well. And so making sure that we're building a diverse set of options, not just one or the other. And then bringing American manufacturing back. I think with some of the decarbonization strategies I mentioned with carbon capture earlier for steel and concrete, America makes some of the cleanest steel in the world. And being able to bring that capacity back and provide, American technologies that are cleaner to the rest of the world is really where we're excited to spend our time. And then that kind of ties me into like the expansion of U.S. exports, trade, and direct investments abroad. We're going to continue focusing on research and development policies. That's our bread and butter. Public-private partnerships is also going to be a lot of the space we spend our time in. But I think one of the other things I'm personally excited about is this year is going to be a lot of opportunity to educate. And so we're going to be working with members of Congress, with their staff, to educate them on the key issues and how they can help, see the critical legislation to the finish line.
You mentioned about America producing the cleanest steel. I'm sorry, forgive my ignorance, but how so?
No worries. I'm so glad you asked. So if we look at sort of the top clean producers of steel in the world, I believe, I can't remember the last time I checked, I believe we were the third cleanest in the world or the first. It's been some time. 4 years ago is when I first started working on steel decarbonization. But because of how we make steel in the US, our industry is able to really flourish. So if you know much about steel production, or if you don't know, much about steel production, we make it one of two ways. Either through primary production processes called, blast furnace processes, where we take iron ore from mines and we process it and we take the pure form iron out to make pure iron. And then we run it through the electric arc furnaces, which is where you get steel. And so that is a secondary form of production. And a lot of secondary forms of production also recycle steel. So the majority of our steel here actually in the US is super clean because we recycle a ton of it. And that allows us to have, a full, life cycle of steel. There's no waste. And when we do need new steel production in the US, we also have a process called direct reduction, where you use actually hydrogen and natural gas to be able to produce the steel itself. And so last time I looked, there were 3 DRI facilities in the United States. And then for primary production on blast furnaces, I believe there were 10 facilities. But the amount of new tech that's coming out for steel manufacturing outside of direct reduction even is impressive. And I know that the Department of Energy actually has a lot of new programs that are looking into this as a result of actually the work that we do here at ClearPath, which has been really exciting to see how diverse the innovation space has become in the steel industry.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for clarifying. And Savi, thank you for the conversation in general. This was very enlightening, very insightful. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Violet.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Carbonsations podcast and would like to hear more conversations like this, please be sure to subscribe. We really appreciate the support.